Now that your wife is dead, cry, pack your bags and never come back, said Ricardo, my son-in-law, with a cruel smile as he cut his steak at the dinner table. This house was never really yours anyway. My daughter Clara just smiled and nodded, as if they were discussing the weather. The silence that followed was deafening. The table where Helena and I had shared thousands of meals over 35 years now looked like a courtroom where I was being tried and convicted. It had been exactly 1 week since we buried my wife. 1 week since I held her cold hand for the last time in the hospital, promising that I would take care of everything as she always had. The pain was still so fresh that it hurt to breathe. My name is Tony, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I would be kicked out of my own home by my only daughter and her husband. Pass the salt, Ricardo asked casually, as if he hadn't just destroyed my life with one sentence. I passed the salt shaker with slightly trembling hands. Not from fear, but from a cold anger that was beginning to form a knot in my stomach. Ricardo was 29 when he married Clara 15 years ago. From day one, I could tell he saw our family as a business opportunity. Always asking about investments, always interested in our finances, always suggesting that Clara deserved more than we could offer. 2 weeks should be enough for you to find a suitable place, Ricardo continued, wiping his mouth with his napkin as if he were wrapping up a business meeting. Maybe one of those retirement homes with activities for people your age. Clara finally spoke, her voice strangely distant. It's for your own good, Dad. This house is too big for you alone. And with the current economy, Ricardo and I need to think about our family's future. I looked at my daughter, the girl I taught to ride a bike, who cried in my arms when she broke her arm at age 8, who called me her hero when she was little. Now she avoided my gaze, pretending to be very busy arranging the salad on her plate. I understand, I said calmly, surprising us both with my composure. The truth is, I had been expecting this. Helena had warned me months before she died. Tony, watch how they look at our house, at our things. They're counting the days. At the time, I thought it was just the medication talking. Now I realized that my wife, even sick, was still more perceptive than I was. Great, Ricardo smiled, clearly relieved that he hadn't met any resistance. We can start taking some measurements tomorrow. We're thinking of knocking down the wall between the living room and the kitchen. They already had plans. While I was watching over my wife's body, they were planning renovations. I finished dinner in silence, each bite weighing like lead in my stomach. When I got up to go upstairs, Ricardo added with false kindness, "Oh, and Tony, it would be best if you started getting rid of some things. We don't want the move to be too traumatic." Traumatic. As if being kicked out of the house where I had built my life was just a minor inconvenience. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the silence. In the bedroom I had shared with Helena for 3 decades, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The curtains she had chosen, the dresser where she kept her jewelry, the armchair where she read her novels every night. 2 weeks to pack up a lifetime. But as I looked out the window at the garden Helena loved so much, a memory came back to me. 3 months before she died, she had insisted that we go to the bank to update some important documents. At the time, I thought it was just end-of-life paperwork. Now I wondered if my wife, always so thoughtful, had left some surprises for Ricardo and Clara. If you're enjoying this story of overcoming adversity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this apparent defeat would turn into the biggest mistake Ricardo ever made. Because while they were measuring my living room tomorrow, I would be paying a visit to the bank. And what I would discover there would change everything. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices in the living room. It was only 7 in the morning, but Ricardo and Clara were already downstairs, talking in excited tones that contrasted sharply with the morning that still hung over the house. I went downstairs and found them measuring the wall between the living room and the kitchen, just as Ricardo had mentioned the night before. Clara was holding one end of the tape measure while he jotted down numbers in a new notebook. "Good morning," I said, my voice still hoarse from sleep. Ricardo barely glanced in my direction. "Tony, perfect. We were calculating how much it will cost to knock down this wall. 3.5 meters, Clara. Write that down." My daughter finally greeted me with a quick nod, as if I were an inconvenient neighbor who had shown up at the wrong time. "You guys didn't waste any time," I commented, heading to the kitchen to make coffee. "Time is money," Ricardo replied, his favorite phrase since I'd known him. "We want to start renovating as soon as you move out. The real estate market is hot right now, but we don't know how long it will last." While the coffee was brewing, I watched this man who had become my son-in-law 15 years ago. Ricardo had always been different from Clara's other boyfriends. More calculating, more interested in impressing Helena and me than in really getting to know our daughter. I remember the first time I brought Clara over for dinner. He spent more time asking about my profession, our investments, and the value of the house than talking to her. Helena and I found it strange, but Clara seemed delighted by the attention. My father worked in construction, Ricardo explained that first night. He always taught me to evaluate properties well. This house has a solid structure. At the time, I thought it was just professional interest. Now I understood that it was pure speculation. Over the years, Ricardo always found ways to insert himself into our financial decisions. When we bought a new car, he suggested a specific dealership where he had contacts. When we renewed our life insurance, he knew a broker who could give us special conditions. Helena was always suspicious, but I thought he was just being a good son-in-law, trying to help the family. Ricardo, I said, returning to the living room with my cup of coffee, I'm curious about something. He stopped measuring and looked at me with that patient expression he used when he thought I was slow to understand something obvious. You said the house was never really mine. Can you explain that? Clara exchanged a quick glance with her husband. She was the one who answered. Dad, you know how it works. Technically, the house was in Grandpa's name, then it passed to Mom when he died, and now it passes to me. You've always been more like a tenant. Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. 43 years of taking care of this house, painting, renovating, paying taxes, and I was just a tenant. Interesting perspective, I said calmly. And where did you get that legal interpretation? Ricardo closed his notebook and looked at me directly for the first time that morning. Tony, I'm going to be blunt with you because Clara asked me to be gentle, but you need to understand the reality. Helena controlled the family finances for years. The house, the bills, the investments, everything was in her name. Now that she's gone, those responsibilities naturally fall to Clara. Naturally, I repeated, savoring the word. Exactly. And frankly, at your age with your health, it doesn't make sense for you to carry that burden alone. Property taxes, maintenance, utility bills that only go up. It's a lot of responsibility for a man who should be relaxing, enjoying his golden years. The condescension in his voice was almost tangible. He spoke to me as if I were a child who needed simple explanations about how the world worked. Besides, Ricardo continued, Clara and I are thinking about expanding our family. We need space, and this house has so much wasted potential. That guest room could be a beautiful nursery, and with the wall knocked down, we'd have a much more modern open concept. Clara smiled when she heard about the plans for children, a discussion they had clearly had several times without including me. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Planning what? Clara replied quickly, too defensively. The renovation. The move. My relocation. Ricardo and Clara exchanged another glance. This time, he was the one who answered. To be honest, Helena and I have talked about it a few times over the last few months. She was worried about you being here alone after she left. It was her idea that Clara take on more responsibility for the house. My hand trembled slightly as I raised the cup to my mouth. Had Helena discussed getting me out of the house with my son-in-law? That didn't make sense. She had always been protective, always defended our independence. Helena said that? I asked, my voice weaker than I intended. Several times, Clara confirmed quickly. She would call me when you weren't around, worried. She said you were getting forgetful, leaving the lights on, sometimes forgetting to lock the door. Every word was a lie, and I knew it. Helena never doubted my abilities. If anything, she always told me I was the more organized of the two of us. But the way they told these stories, with specific details and feigned concern, almost made me question my own memories. Look, Tony, Ricardo said, putting away the tape measure, we don't want this to be traumatic for you. That's why we're being kind with the deadline. 2 weeks is generous, considering we could demand immediate transfer of ownership. Generous. As if it were a favor to give me 2 weeks to leave the house where I had lived for decades. What if I don't want to leave? I asked, more out of curiosity than defiance. The silence that followed was icy. Ricardo put his hand on Clara's shoulder, a possessive gesture I had noticed before. "Dad," Clara said finally, "please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We love you, but there are legal issues involved. Issues you probably don't fully understand." "Legal issues," I repeated. "Yes," Ricardo added. "Helena made everything very clear in her documentation. I have copies, if you'd like to see them." The confidence in his voice was absolute. He truly believed he held all the cards. At that moment, I remembered again the visit to the bank that Helena had insisted we make. "Important documents," she had said. "Necessary updates." "I'd like to see those documents," I said calmly. Ricardo smiled, clearly pleased that I was finally cooperating with the inevitable. "Of course. They're in my car. Let me get them." As he left, Clara approached me with an expression that was meant to be comforting. "Dad, I know this is hard. But you'll see, when you move to a more suitable place, you'll feel much better. Without all these responsibilities, without the stress of maintaining such a large house." Suitable. Responsibilities. Stress. As if 43 years of life built in this house were just problems I needed to be freed from. Ricardo returned with a neat folder, the kind he used for presentations at work. Inside were copies of documents I vaguely recognized: our marriage certificate, the deed to the house, Helena's will. "Look here," he said, pointing to a specific line in the will. "The property passes directly to Clara, as the only surviving child. You have the right to live there as long as you are married to Helena, but that right ends upon her death." I read the words, trying to understand the legal language. It seemed legitimate, but something didn't feel right. The handwriting was Helena's, but some of the phrases sounded strange, different from how she normally spoke. "Was this will recently updated?" I asked. "About 6 months ago," Ricardo replied promptly. "Helena wanted to make sure everything was in order, especially after the doctors confirmed that the treatment wasn't working." 6 months ago. That was exactly when Helena had insisted we go to the bank to update important documents. But as I looked at the papers in Ricardo's hands, a specific memory came back to me. On our last visit to the bank, Helena had held my hand with unusual force and said something that had seemed confusing at the time. "Tony, promise me you'll always double-check everything. Some people are very good at making papers look official when they're not." At the time, I thought it was the medication talking. Now I wondered if she was trying to warn me about something. "Well," I said, handing back the documents, "I suppose I should start looking for a place to live." The look of relief on their faces was evident. They had expected resistance, tears, pleas. Instead, they found apparent acceptance. "Great," Ricardo said, putting away the folder. "Clara knows some excellent places for people in your situation. We'll help you with the search." "In my situation," I repeated mentally. "Widowed. Elderly. Disposable. There's just one thing," I added casually. "I'd like to go to the bank today, check some account details. Just to make sure I fully understand the financial situation before making any decisions about where to live." For a brief moment, I saw something flash across Ricardo's eyes. It wasn't exactly concern, but a hesitation that he quickly masked. "Of course," he said. "But remember that most of the accounts were in Helena's name. There may not be much to check." I smiled back, keeping my expression neutral. "I understand." Still, Helena was always very organized. I'm sure she left everything clearly documented. After they left to look at some suitable properties for me, I sat down in the same armchair where Helena used to read and contemplated the situation. In less than 24 hours, I had gone from bereaved husband to a legal occupant of my own home. My daughter and son-in-law had documents, plans, and absolute confidence in their right to remove me from my life. But as I finished my now cold coffee, something inside me began to stir. It wasn't exactly anger, but a cold determination I hadn't felt in years. Helena had taken me to the bank 3 months before she died. She had held my hand and warned me about papers that look official when they're not. And now I had 2 weeks to find out exactly what my wife had prepared for this moment. Because knowing Helena as I did, she would never leave me completely defenseless. And if Ricardo thought I was just a confused old man being kindly removed from the picture, he was about to find out how wrong he was. The visit to the bank couldn't wait any longer. The National Bank was 15 minutes from my house, but the trip seemed to take forever. Each traffic light gave me more time to think about what I might find, and each thought oscillated between hope and despair. I parked in the same spot where Helena and I always parked, under the shade of the oak tree she said was her favorite. The roots run deep, she used to say. Even when storms come, the tree remains. Margaret Silva, the manager who had been serving us for 15 years, greeted me with a careful smile reserved for newly bereaved customers. "Mr. Tony, it's good to see you. Please accept my condolences again." Mrs. Helena was a special woman. "Thank you, Margaret. I need to understand our financial situation. I'm facing some unexpected changes." She led me to her office, the same room Helena had insisted we come to 3 months earlier. At the time, I had stayed in the waiting room while she took care of some technical details. "I'll access your accounts," Margaret said, typing on her computer. After a few minutes, her eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Tony, there are several accounts here that you may not be fully aware of." My stomach tightened. "What kind of accounts?" "Well, in addition to the joint checking account you've always used, there's a substantial savings account, 2 certificates of deposit, and," she paused, checking the screen again, "a business account in the name of Henderson and Associates Consulting." Henderson and Associates. I repeated. "I've never heard of that company." "According to our records, it was established 5 years ago. Mrs. Helena was the primary owner, and you are listed as a partner and sole beneficiary in the event of her death." Margaret printed several documents and placed them in front of me. The numbers on the pages seemed surreal. The savings account had a balance that could sustain my lifestyle for decades. The certificates of deposit represented investments I never knew we had. But it was the business account that really shocked me. "Does this company have regular income?" I asked, pointing to the statements showing consistent monthly deposits. "Yes, consulting contracts with several local companies. Mainly operational efficiency analysis and process optimization." Mrs. Helena was well respected in that field. Helena had worked as an operations manager at a large company before retiring 10 years ago. Apparently, she never really stopped working, she just changed her strategy. "Margaret, why didn't she ever tell me about this?" The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Tony, can I speak openly?" I nodded. In recent years, Mrs. Helena expressed concerns about family pressures. She mentioned that some family members had unrealistic financial expectations and that she wanted to protect her future independence. "Family pressures," I repeated, thinking of Ricardo and his constant questions about our investments. "There is one more thing," Margaret continued. Mrs. Helena left specific instructions in the event of any attempt to contest her financial arrangements. She opened a locked drawer and took out a sealed envelope with my name on it. She asked me to give this to you personally if any questions arose about the legitimacy of the documents or property rights. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Helena's familiar handwriting and several photocopies of documents. "My dear Tony," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means that our concerns about the family have come to fruition. I hope you never need to use this information, but if you do, know that every decision I have made was to protect you and our life together." The letter explained that Helena had discovered that Ricardo had been investigating our finances for years, even trying to access bank information without authorization. She had documented every attempt, every suspicious question, every moment he showed excessive interest in our financial situation. But most revealing were the photocopies attached. Documents showing that Ricardo had forged several of my signatures on documents I had never seen, attempts to open joint accounts without my knowledge, and even a consultation with a lawyer about inheritance rights in cases of senile dependency. Helena found all this. I asked Margaret. Mrs. Helena was very meticulous. When she became suspicious, she hired a private investigator. She has all the necessary documentation to prove that the documents you mentioned on the phone yesterday are probably forgeries. Forgeries. The documents Ricardo had shown me with such confidence were fake. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Clara. "Dad, where are you? Ricardo came here to start taking measurements and you're not home." "I'm at the bank, taking care of some business." "What business?" "Dad, you shouldn't be making financial decisions on your own. Ricardo can help you with that." The irony was almost funny. Ricardo wanted to help me with the very finances he was trying to steal from me. Clara, how long have you and Ricardo been planning to kick me out of the house? Silence on the other end of the line. Dad, what are you talking about? We only want what's best for you. And what's best for me is to be kicked out of my house a week after burying your mother? Dad, you're being dramatic. No one is kicking you out. We're offering you a better life. I hung up the phone and turned my attention back to Margaret. Is there anything else I need to know? Mr. Tony, Mrs. Helena has also established a legal fund. If there are any attempts to contest or manipulate the will, there are resources available for a full defense, including investigation of fraud and document forgery. For the first time in a week, I felt something other than sadness and shock. I felt a cold, determined anger growing inside me. Helena hadn't just protected me financially. She had armed me for a war I didn't even know I was fighting. Margaret, I would like access to all of these funds, and I would also like to speak with the private investigator Helena hired. Certainly. I will arrange everything today. When I left the bank an hour later, I was no longer the confused and vulnerable widower who had walked in. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and more importantly, I knew I had the resources to deal with it. My phone rang again. It was Ricardo. Tony, we need to talk. Now. Sure, Ricardo. I'm on my way home. Great. And Tony? Bring any bank documents you have. We want to make sure everything is being handled properly. I smiled for the first time in days. Don't worry, Ricardo. I'll bring any bank documentation you need to see. Because while he and Clara were measuring my living room, thinking they were reorganizing their new home, I was about to show them exactly who really owned what. The war Helena had predicted was finally beginning. And unlike what Ricardo imagined, I was not a helpless old man being gently removed from the picture. I was a fully armed, funded, and furious adversary whom they had fatally underestimated. The real measurement that mattered wasn't of their living room, but of the full extent of the mistake they had made. When I got home, Ricardo and Clara were in the living room with a man I didn't know, all huddled over architectural plans spread out on the coffee table. Tony, perfect, Ricardo said without looking up. This is Marcus, our architect. We were discussing the possibilities for renovation. The architect, a young man with modern glasses, greeted me politely. Mr. Tony, what a magnificent property. With a few modifications, it could become something truly spectacular. Modifications, I repeated, noticing how they had already marked the plans with red pen. Total open concept, Clara explained excitedly. We'll knock down the wall between the living room and kitchen, expand the master bedroom, and turn his office into a walk-in closet. My office. The place where Helena and I used to plan our retirement, where she kept her accounting books, where we spent hours talking about our dreams. And when would these renovations begin? I asked calmly. As soon as you move out, Ricardo replied. In fact, Marcus can start next Monday. 2 weeks is more than enough time for you to find a suitable place. The architect seemed uncomfortable with the conversation. Perhaps I should come back when you finalize the family details, he muttered. There are no details to finalize, Ricardo said firmly. Tony understands the situation. Don't you, Tony? I smiled and nodded. I understand perfectly. After the architect left, Ricardo approached me with an expression that was meant to be fatherly. Tony, I know this is difficult. But think of the possibilities. Without the responsibility of maintaining this house, you can focus on enjoying your golden years. Maybe travel, meet people your age. My age, I repeated. Exactly. People who understand your challenges. Isolation isn't good for anyone, especially someone dealing with loss. The condescension in his voice was so thick I could almost cut it with a knife. That afternoon, while they went out to look at some more suitable properties for me, I called the number Margaret had given me. Harrison Private Investigations, a female voice answered. I'd like to speak to someone about the Helena Henderson case. One moment, please. A male voice took over the line. Tony? This is James Harrison. Helena spoke highly of you. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Margaret told me you have information about Ricardo. I have a complete file. I can be there in an hour if you like. James Harrison arrived right on time, a professional-looking man in his 50s with a bulging briefcase. Helena hired me 8 months ago, he explained, sitting down in the armchair Helena used to sit in. She suspected Ricardo was investigating her finances in an irregular manner. He opened the briefcase and began showing photographs, documents, and reports. Ricardo tried to access your bank information at least 12 times in the last 2 years. He always used questionable methods, impersonating you on the phone, trying to convince employees that he was acting on your behalf. The photographs showed Ricardo leaving law firms specializing in inheritance law, talking to real estate appraisers, even visiting nursing homes. He's been planning this for a long time, I muttered. More than 2 years, according to our records. But Helena discovered something even more disturbing. James pulled out another set of documents. These are the wills Ricardo presented to you today. We compared them to the original documents at the registry office. They're very well done forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. My stomach clenched. How did you get access to the original documents? Helena gave me power of attorney to investigate. Her actual will is very different from what Ricardo is claiming. James opened the official document. The real will left the house to me, with Clara as heir only if I died or chose to transfer the property voluntarily. Ricardo forged a completely new will, James continued. And it's not the first time. We found evidence that he tried to forge her signature on at least 6 different financial documents over the years. Why didn't Helena tell me about this? She wanted to be absolutely sure before worrying you. And James hesitated. She was afraid you would try to confront Ricardo directly, which could give him time to destroy evidence or create new forgeries. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing every piece of evidence. Photographs of Ricardo with known forgers, recordings of conversations where he discussed ways to speed up the inheritance, even evidence that he had tried to bribe registry office employees. What did Helena want me to do with all this? I finally asked. She left specific instructions. If Ricardo tried to remove you from the house, you were to use this evidence not only to defend yourself, but to ensure that he faced the full legal consequences. James pulled one last document from the folder. Helena also established a fund for legal expenses. She hired the best law firm in the area and paid 2 years' worth of fees in advance. At that moment, I heard cars pulling up in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Ricardo and Clara returning, accompanied by a well-dressed woman carrying a briefcase, probably a real estate agent. James, how long do you need to put together a complete legal response? With the evidence we have? 24 hours for the initial documents. A week for a complete package that would include criminal charges for forgery and fraud. Do it. Tony, are you sure? This goes far beyond simply keeping her house. Ricardo could face jail time. I looked out the window again. Ricardo was gesturing excitedly to the real estate agent, pointing to different parts of the property as if he already owned it. Helena spent 8 months protecting our family from a man who was planning to rob us. He forged documents, tried to defraud me, and now he's trying to kick me out of my own home a week after I buried my wife. I turned my attention back to James. Do everything. I want him to face every possible legal consequence. After James left, I sat down at Helena's desk and opened her last gift to me, an envelope Margaret had told me to open when you're ready to act. Inside was a final letter. My dear Tony, if you are reading this, it means Ricardo has shown his true colors. Don't feel guilty about what you're about to do. Protecting our family sometimes means protecting it from members who have chosen the wrong path. You're not just my husband, you're my hero. Now show them why. When Ricardo, Clara, and the real estate agent entered, they found me sitting calmly in my chair. Tony, this is Sandra, our real estate agent, Ricardo announced. She wanted to take a look at the property to assess its market potential. What a magnificent property, Sandra said professionally. With the planned renovations, it could easily be worth 60% more than the current value. 60%, I repeated. How much money is that? Approximately $240,000 in appreciation, she replied promptly. I looked at Ricardo and Clara, who exchanged satisfied smiles. And when do you plan to list the property? As soon as you move out, Clara replied. Sandra said we can take some preliminary photographs tomorrow, just to get everything ready. I see. Sandra opened her folder. Mr. Tony, if you don't mind, I'd like to take some basic measurements. It's standard procedure for preliminary appraisals. Sure, I replied. Measure everything you want. While Sandra took her notes and Ricardo planned renovations that would never happen, I watched with a calmness they interpreted as resignation. If you're following this story of family triumph, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened in the next 24 hours would completely change who had the power in this family. Because while they were measuring a house they thought was theirs, I was just waiting for James Harrison's call confirming that all the legal documents were ready. The math that really mattered wasn't square footage or market values. It was the math of justice. And that bill was about to be paid in full. The next morning Ricardo and Clara arrived early, accompanied by Sandra and a notary I had never seen before. Tony, we brought Mr. Mendez to formalize the transfer of ownership, Ricardo announced, her voice laden with false solemnity. We thought it best to settle everything today. The notary, a thin man with glasses, opened a professional folder. Mr. Tony, you just need to sign a few documents to transfer ownership to your daughter Clara. How convenient, I replied calmly. But before signing anything, I would like you to see some documents I found. I placed James Harrison's folder on the coffee table, exactly where they had spread out their architectural plans the day before. What documents? Clara asked, her voice slightly tense. Well, first we have this will, I said, opening the folder and removing the official document. Helena's real will, duly registered at the notary's office. Ricardo's face paled visibly. Tony, we've already discussed this. You have the will. I do. But apparently the document you showed me is a very well-done forgery. The silence in the room was deafening. Sandra looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. The notary frowned. Fake. Clara asked, her voice high-pitched. Dad, what are you talking about? I handed a copy of James Harrison's report to the notary. This is a technical report comparing the two documents. As you can see, the signatures are forged and the paper used didn't even exist when Helena was alive. Ricardo tried to maintain his composure. Tony, this is ridiculous. Why would anyone forge a will? Excellent question, I replied, removing more documents from the folder. Perhaps these photographs will clarify things. I spread the photos James had collected on the table, Ricardo leaving law offices specializing in inheritance, talking to forgers, visiting nursing homes. What's this? Clara murmured, picking up one of the photographs. Evidence that your husband has been planning to get me out of this house for over 2 years, Clara. Including attempts to forge my signature on bank documents. The notary was studying the papers with growing alarm. Mr. Ricardo, these are very serious reports. If confirmed, they represent federal crimes. That's when Ricardo finally lost his composure. Tony, you're being manipulated by someone. This evidence could be fabricated. It could, I agreed. That's why I also have this. I placed the recordings James had obtained on the table, telephone conversations in which Ricardo discussed speeding up the inheritance and removing family obstacles. My voice can't be fabricated, Ricardo said, but his confidence was quickly crumbling. Clara picked up one of the bank statements and her face contorted as she read it. Ricardo, did you try to access Dad's accounts without authorization? Clara, I was trying to protect our family. Protect. I exploded for the first time, my voice echoing through the room. You forged documents to steal the house I've lived in for 43 years. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw 2 official cars pulling up in the driveway. Ah, I said calmly, it must be the police. Ricardo's face turned gray. The police. Of course. Document forgery and attempted fraud are serious crimes. James Harrison handed over all the evidence to the district attorney yesterday afternoon. Clara dropped the papers. Dad, did you call the police? No, I didn't, dear. I just cooperated with an investigation that was already underway. Apparently, Ricardo isn't the only one they're investigating for similar fraud. The officers entered after I gave them permission, one of them consulting an official warrant. Ricardo Mendez? The detective asked. That's me, Ricardo replied, his voice just a whisper. You're under arrest for document forgery, attempted fraud, and tampering with official records. As they read his rights, Ricardo looked at me with an expression of hatred and despair mixed together. "You planned all this," he accused. "Helena helped you set me up." "No, Ricardo," I replied calmly. "Helena protected me from you. There's a difference." Clara was crying now, reality finally penetrating her denial. "Daddy, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the forgeries." I looked at my daughter, seeing in her the child she once was, before Ricardo poisoned her perspective on family and loyalty. "Clara, your mother left a specific legal fund for your defense, provided you cooperate fully with the investigation." The detective confirmed that Clara would not be arrested immediately, but would need to appear in court as a witness. Sandra and the notary left quickly, clearly wanting distance from the whole situation. As Ricardo was led away in handcuffs, he shouted one last threat, "This isn't over, Tony. I'm going to fight this." "Good luck," I replied, using the same words Helena used to say when someone made empty threats. After everyone left, the house was silent for the first time in days. I sat down in Helena's armchair and looked around the room where Ricardo had planned to tear down walls and reconfigure our life. The coffee table was still covered with evidence, photographs, documents, reports proving that my wife had spent the last months of her life protecting me from a betrayal I never imagined I was facing. My phone rang. It was James Harrison. "Tony, I just spoke with the prosecutor. With the evidence we provided, Ricardo is looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. And Clara, if she cooperates, she'll probably get probation." The prosecutor believes she was more manipulated than complicit. I hung up and picked up Helena's final letter, rereading her words about protection and family. She hadn't just left me financial resources. She had left me the truth, documented and irrefutable. As the sun set through the windows of the room that Ricardo would never renovate, I realized that Helena's true legacy was not money or property. It was the lesson that sometimes protecting those we love means protecting them even from themselves. And that the most powerful revenge is not the one that destroys the enemy, but the one that restores the justice they tried to corrupt. The game had ended exactly as Helena had planned. With truth prevailing over manipulation, and with our family protected from the very members who had chosen the path of betrayal. Ricardo had fatally underestimated not only me, but the woman who had spent 3 decades learning to protect those she loved from any threat. Even those that came from within the home. 6 months later, I was sitting in the garden Helena loved so much, reading a letter from the lawyer. Ricardo had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for document falsification and attempted fraud. His bail had been denied after they discovered he had tried to bribe witnesses. Clara appeared at the back door, hesitant. "Can I come in, Dad?" In recent months, she had cooperated fully with the investigation, revealing details about Ricardo's manipulations that even I had no idea about. Apparently, he had gradually isolated her from me, planting doubts about my mental capacity and inventing stories about conversations Helena never had. "Of course, daughter." She sat down next to me, looking at the roses Helena had planted. "I found this among Ricardo's things," she said, handing me a notebook. "I thought you should see it." I opened the notebook and found pages of detailed notes about our finances, routines, even observations about when Helena took her medications. He had documented everything like a predator studying his prey. "Clara, you really didn't know about this?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Dad, I swear I didn't. He convinced me that you were getting confused after Mom died. He said it was our duty to protect you from bad financial decisions." I closed the notebook and looked at my daughter. She had lost her husband, the home where they lived as dependents, and almost lost her father due to Ricardo's manipulations. "Clara, your mother left a special account for you. It's enough for you to start over, maybe go back to college like you always wanted." Her eyes lit up for the first time in months. "Dad, I want to come home. Not to live off you, but to rebuild our relationship. Forgive me." I hugged my daughter, feeling that Helena would be proud. She had not only protected me financially, but had created a way to bring our family back together after the storm. Margaret Silva called the following week with an unexpected proposal. Several families had approached the bank after Ricardo's case, suspecting similar manipulations. They wanted me to share my experience in lectures on financial protection for the elderly. "Helena always said you had a gift for teaching," Margaret commented. "How about turning this difficult experience into something that helps other people?" 6 months later, I was giving my 5th lecture at the community center. In the audience, men and women my age took notes on financial warning signs and how to protect their assets from manipulative family members. After the talk, a man approached me. "Tony, my daughter-in-law was trying to get me to sign some documents I don't understand. After hearing your story, I'm going to get a lawyer first." It was in that moment that I understood Helena's true gift. She hadn't just saved me from Ricardo, she had given me a purpose that honored our life together. Ricardo tried to destroy me, thinking I was just a vulnerable widower. But Helena taught me that our greatest strength doesn't come from avoiding storms, but from using what we learn from them to strengthen others. If this story of overcoming adversity and protecting your family touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to find out how other people turned their worst betrayals into their greatest victories. The last I heard, Ricardo was serving his sentence and attending mandatory therapy. As for me, well, I was teaching entire families to build financial walls that no predator could tear down. Helena was right about deep roots. Even when storms come, the tree remains. And sometimes, it grows even stronger.